Live.
We are live. Welcome. I would like to call to order the Pentucket Regional School Committee business meeting of October 20th, 2020. Roll call. Oh, that's on my list. Chris Redding.
Here.
Marie Falzani.
Here.
Joanna.
Here.
Lisa.
Here.
Emily.
Did you say me? I'm here. Sorry.
Wayne.
Yeah.
And is Bill not coming on today? Oh, wait, Rick, sorry.
Here.
And Bill? No Bill yet?
I'm going to take a wild guess. He may be thinking at 6:30 again. He fully intends to be here, so he might have 6:30 on his mind.
Okay. And Wayne?
Yeah.
Dina is here.
I'm sorry. 4.0.
4.0. Okay, could I please get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote, Wayne?
Yes.
Joanna?
Yes.
Lisa?
Yes.
Emily?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Marie? Dina? All right, everybody. Okay, could I please have a motion to approve the business meeting minutes for October 6, 2020?
So second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote, Wayne?
Yes.
Joanna? Lisa?
Yes.
Emily?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Marie?
Yes.
Dina, yes. Could I please have a motion to approve the minutes for the Business, Finance, and Operations Subcommittee meeting of October 6, 2020?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, Wayne?
Yes.
Joanna?
Yes.
Lisa?
Yes.
Emily?
Yes.
Yes. Dick?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Marie? Dina, yes. And could I please have a motion to approve the minutes for business meeting on October 7th, 2020?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Wayne?
Yes.
Joanna?
Yes.
Lisa?
Yes.
Emily?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Marie? Dina, yes. Subcommittee updates, finance?
Nothing right now. I think we may have some updates hoping for the next few weeks regarding the state budgeting changes.
Okay. Teaching, learning, and accountability?
We are having a meeting next Wednesday, the 28th of October, at 4:00 virtually. I can send the link for anyone else who is interested.
Okay. It's the 28th. For some reason, I thought it was tomorrow. Okay. Policy? Marie?
Yes, we're having a meeting on Friday from 9 to 11 this week.
Great, thank you. And Chris, communications?
Nothing. We need to schedule a meeting and life is busy. We haven't gotten around to it.
I get that. Okay, so,
But we went to community.
oh yeah, we
So
did. do-
Brian can explain some communication.
Bill should be coming right now.
Okay.
When I see him, I'll put him in.
And now we have a public comment.
We have Ashley Tiller with us.
Ashley Tiller.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for letting me speak tonight. My name is Ashley Tiller, and I have been a special education teacher at Bagnell for 13 years, and I've been a resident of Groveland my whole life. Before I get started tonight, I want to ask you all to please listen to the teachers that are sharing tonight, not through the lens of teachers complaining, but through the lens of employees advocating for reasonable working conditions. There seems to be some disconnect between the reality of what is happening day to day in a pandemic hybrid classroom And I would like to share with you tonight some observations as someone who has lived this reality the last 2 months. I see teachers working morning, noon, nights, and weekends, trying to keep up with the demands of the hybrid model while still not being able to get to everything they feel they need to do. I see teachers who are spending their own money to purchase technology that will be reliable to try to make it a little bit easier for them to get through the day. And I see teachers training themselves on programs that the district has given us on our free time. I see teachers who are putting themselves at risk to be accessible and helpful to their students by having to be on eye level, side by side, or in front of their students to help them and problem solve with them. I see parents upset at teachers for a setup that's out of our control during a pandemic, and teachers and administrators are having to deal with all of these parent complaints. I see teachers and students in classrooms with windows open and layers on, all while not having a report that says whether or not it's safe to be in our classrooms. I see teachers during a pandemic hybrid teaching model that continue to get responsibilities piled on, such as recess duty, possibly live streaming from a classroom, planning from remote, planning for hybrid, making work accessible to all of the students, and on and on. I see our already depleted staff being spread even thinner because of the lack of substitutes, so daily schedules are disrupted and student services are not always possible. I see special education teachers and service providers scheduled down to the minute, running back and forth between rooms for services, as well as running small groups with students both at home and in front of them at the same time in order to meet minutes of an IEP. I see teachers who love their students like their own children and are putting their own needs aside to try to make this the most successful pandemic teaching situation that we can, given the materials and support that we have. As teachers, we always find a way to make it work with whatever situation is thrown at us. And I give all of my colleagues so much credit for not letting them see us sweat. But we've reached a point where it's impossible to keep up. I'm not sure what the answer is, but whatever the steps may be, teachers need to be part of the discussion, as we're the ones on the front line of this life every day, and we need to work together for the benefit of our students, staff, and families. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashley.
Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you.
She was 3 minutes on the dot. Now we have Amy Lapata.
Hey, Amy, you're good to go. Oh, you're on mute, though. You're just on mute.
Sorry about that. You'd think I'd know better by now. Thank you, everyone, for your time this evening. I promise I'm going to make it brief because I know how hard everyone is working. So on that note, I would like to start by thanking our school committee. It's not lost on me how much of your own time you have sacrificed on behalf of our students. In these unprecedented times, you have all shown up and done the hard work. You've made decisions based in the best interests of our students, and I'm really appreciative of that. I'm speaking to you tonight as both a Pentucket educator and a parent. I know firsthand how much work Pentucket educators are putting into this model due to our dedication to our students. As an educator, I can speak to our tenacity. We're so grateful to have Mondays to plan. This is invaluable as we collaborate and plan a week's worth of curriculum at a time. As a parent, I watched as the high school educators seamlessly transitioned their curriculum from hybrid to 100% remote at a moment's notice due to concerns around a potential COVID-19 outbreak. Thank you not only to administration for being so proactive regarding our students' health, but also to the educators for their flexibility and understanding. That being said, I think it's important to consider the perspective of all stakeholders. I am living this model from all perspectives. I teach all day, I receive the parent emails, I come home, I hear my husband's concerns, I hear my children's concerns. It's never ending. And this is not easy for anyone. I've been asked to provide feedback to the district as a parent on more than one occasion. I don't recall once being asked to do the same as a classroom teacher, teaching in person. It occurs to me that I might have information you want to hear. Educators are afraid to speak up because they feel that it will be viewed as complaining, and that is simply not true. We have been here putting in the hard work too. We're carrying out the plans that you set in motion and know firsthand what is working and what maybe could be changed to better meet the needs of all our stakeholders. I'm asking you to consider reaching out to those of us on the front lines. We want nothing more to make this work not only for ourselves, but for our students and our families. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
In the classroom, we always appreciate your work.
Thank you.
All right, I don't, so just, Wayne, just so you know, I don't see Bill in the studio.
Well, he's evidently lost the address, so he would like you to send it again so he can get in. He just called to let me know we
Okay, go
can't
ahead.
find it.
And do that.
Okay.
Wayne, if you would mind, if you're talking to him or texting him, you could just let him know that I just sent him, I resent the message, so it's got the link right into it. He just needs to click the link and he'll hop on in.
Will do.
I sent it to both of his email addresses, just in case.
Okay, so moving on, there's no one else in public comment. We will go to superintendent news.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. So first thing I wanted to do tonight was just, I guess, congratulate and thank Ms. Buteri and Mr. Day. Last week, I've been speaking to them for about a week and a half. Mr. Conway and I, and quickly, I mean, it didn't take long to come to the realization that we've gone from just over 200 students to about 275 students into remote. And with those students comes teachers that are trying to support them. And those teachers are trying to reach out to a whole bunch of different folks. And there's no one person for the students, the parents, or the teachers to go to. So knowing that Ms. Buteri has all that experience, she's worked with all grade levels from pre-K all the way up to 12th grade. She's extremely tech savvy, as you've seen in some of her presentations. And she has an exceptional skill set working with having interpersonal skills. We felt like she'd be an excellent fit to help take on, so it's kind of the principle of the remote learning, a portion of the work we're doing. And this is not a permanent thing. It's just as long as we are in remote the way we're doing it now for those students, that she'll be overseeing that. And then Mr. Day, who's been at Bagnell School for I think about 20 years now. He knows the school really well. The teachers highly regard him. So he's moving into the interim principal at Bagnell. Again, this is temporary, but just want to congratulate both of them on that. One other thing I wanted to just talk about are the 2-week COVID metrics. I know I've sometimes I've shared this with you, and I'll share it with you, the public, so they can see what we're talking about here. But this is just a spreadsheet that shows what things have looked like town by town, and the part in green are the numbers. Those are the last 3 weeks. That's the look back. That we're supposed to look at the last 3 weeks, and you can see Groveland this past week was in yellow. It was the week before as well. This week coming up, I'm not sure. I think the number drops a little bit, but I'm not sure of the new cases. That's something that we'll find out tomorrow after 6 o'clock. West Newbury was in the red. It's interesting, if you look at Groveland, so the percent positive test rate, it went from 1.57, so it dropped to 1.31. So that's good, but that was up from 0.53 3 weeks prior. In West Newbury we know is red, and we know why that is, right? There was one big cluster that accounts for 80% of those. And that's obviously been taken care of. So we expect that West Newbury probably will be in the red again for that very reason. But even with that, their percent positive test rate dropped out by 1/100%. And then Merrimack continues to be unshaded, and their percent positive rate going from 1.89 down to 1.01. So that's just the trend of the last 2 weeks. But you can see 136, 189, 101. It's relatively consistent, except for that Groveland had that bump right here. But if you take out that week of September 30th, it's relatively consistent. As a whole, again, our decision's not made just on this data. These numbers right here of what impact these individuals have on the school district, that's the information that we work hard with our local health agents to determine, so we know the best moves that we need to make. So I just wanted to share that information with you. Does anybody have any questions about that data? Because I have plenty more to talk about. All right, so we're going to move on to just this fact, like of that data. When you look at that, all positive cases in our 3 towns are a result of community spread. 0% of the positive cases to this point are the result of school spread. And I know I've said this before, but I think it just bears repeating. In our conversations with the local health agents, they will tell you the same thing. Because of the way we run school, 6 feet apart, masks, all the sanitizing. If there were a positive case in the school, the close contacts don't happen in the school. The close contacts are the people that are outside of school because they've come within that 6 feet for a period of time. So it just bears mentioning. And I do have some of the data nationwide, and we can look at Massachusetts specifically. But that is across the board the case where the distance has been implemented, that the percentage of positive of coming from school spread is incredibly low and sometimes minuscule, obviously compared to community spread. So again, it just has everything to do, and I think it's very important for the viewers here to understand, it has everything to do with the highly controlled environment the school's in. Is the school perfect? It is absolutely not perfect. But when you consider students when they are outside of the school building and all the interactions that they have there, it's much different and much more close than what they have in the school setting. So just wanted to make that comment. So the next thing I wanted to do is just share with you some updates on the new building project. Bill is here. Bill, welcome.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to share with you now just updates on the building project. I know a lot of you had been on the tour, but if you hadn't been on the tour, this is just worth sharing. So you can see this is the process of the construction. Right, what you have right here is laying of a foundation, and this is the pond here in the front. When we went and looked at it, this was a couple of weeks ago. This was the only piece that existed. It is far expanded, and you'll see that. You can kind of see that right here. This is the front piece, and you can see it's starting to go up here. This is the gymnasium that's going up, and the part behind it, and the courtyards, and you can see the wall is starting to go up on the side as well. This is from a different perspective, and again, it's pretty remarkable how quickly this goes up. I believe, if everything goes on schedule, that sometime in February is when the steel will be done. But it's every day steel's coming in, it's getting put up. You can see all the steel trusses there. Again, that's the gym. And if you're up on Farm Lane, that picture on the right is what it looks like from Farm Lane. But that was just a quick update for you on the building projects. So next thing, so our neighbors table. I'm dying to show this video, but I think time might be an issue. So our neighbors table, a lot of you may know that when we ended up going out of school, and even before we went out of school, we knew there was going to be a concern of food shortage in our communities because there were so many layoffs that were happening, and people were losing their jobs and didn't have a way of purchasing food. I mean, there was certainly unemployment, but you have to go through that paperwork process. So there were a lot of people who had these gaps that needed to fill between when the unemployment hit, they needed food. So we partnered up with our neighbors table many weekends, and it got to the point where I know Mr. Conway headed it up and created a schedule. So there was a weekly person from Pentucket that was there helping that effort and getting groceries loaded into cars and just helping the folks at our neighbors table. Well, Pentucket was just recognized this morning. We were presented this plaque, which they actually gave us before. Can't really see it, but it says community. There we go. So it says, well, I can't read what it says. So it says community champion presented to Pentucket Regional School District 2020. So they recognized Pentucket, Newburyport, Brighton, and Amesbury. And these, again, it's not surprising, right? So we all benefit because our communities utilize our neighbors table. But in this meeting that was done, There was a lot of testimony from individuals who, fell on hard times, and the work that was done by all those school committees was just exceptionally well done and incredibly beneficial. So I just wanted to share that news. Chris had mentioned the budget, so I would be remiss if I didn't bring this up. Cherry sheets did come out after the governor released his. Our budget is about $200,000 less than what, and again, this is for this fiscal year 21. It's about $200,000 less than what was provided in January. So, we'll see how that plays out. Circuit breaker, the idea is that circuit breaker is going to be level funded. So if the state, I'll use a simple number, if the state had $100 million for circuit breaker, they're going to budget $100 million this year for circuit breaker. The question is, did costs for special education increase? And I think that's a rhetorical question, the answer being actually yes. So we don't know what that impact's going to be. We would think that the impact, would be relatively a couple percentage points. We hope it's just a couple percentage. And then regional transportation, we're not sure if regional transportation is level funded. I think that would actually work out decently for us because there's not a lot of schools who are adding regional transportation onto their agendas. The SAT, I think so. SAT had the first round that was done. We weren't able to use Northern Essex, so we used Donahue High School, and then we're slated to use the Page and Donahue to help those students take the SAT. I think there was Mr. Seymour, if he was here, he could tell you the exact number. There are 80-something initial, and they might have gone just under 100 students who were able to who were participating in that. So surveys, and I'm glad that came up in the public comments. So we actually, I'll just show you an example. This is actually the teacher one. The principals at the middle to end of last week were going to give out a survey to their teachers to get information. This is the first 3 weeks, so I created this beforehand. This was the template. I said they could take it, they can adjust it, because ultimately in the building level, they needed to know how their teachers were doing, so they knew best how to support their teachers. But these are so some of it's relatively basic. How are things going? So the transitions, the student behavior, hand washing, mask wearing, lunch, completion of work, social distancing. Those are some. And then on this one, it was a ranking. So if you had to rank things from the easiest to the hardest, what are the things that are the easiest for you to be doing right now? What are the things that are hardest for you to be doing? And again, the principals were allowed to take this and make adjustments. But you can see this goes for everything, not just for emails, but coming to work each day is one of the ones. Planning, using the technology, all of that's included to try to capture what are the big obstacles. You heard mentioning earlier the tools that were introduced during the first 10 or 11 days for teachers to use. And again, some of those are applicable to the teachers, some of them are not, depends on the grade level you're in. But just trying to get a feedback from which ones, what they're using, if they don't use it, but what are the tools that they are using, how they find it, because that helps us determine what additional support we need. And then again, it gives them an opportunity to give some feedback on each of those tools. So this was something, again, that the principals had set to send out the middle of last week, towards the end of last week. So it sounds like one instance anyway that may not have happened yet. But so those were surveys. There's also the teachers were giving, and I know certainly in my house this has happened. Teachers have surveyed students, finding out how students have done it. Teachers have also surveyed some parents. Some teachers are surveying students consistently, asking about the difficulty and the time commitment on the assignments. Because it's obviously that's a big impact, but obviously naturally you're not going to have a kindergarten for a second grade teacher surveying kids, asking them how they're doing. And just because I can right now, and I'm not sure how this is going to go at the end, but a big shout out to Bill Buell, because this is a last school committee meeting, and I'm not going to go over all of the details, but I'll just flat out say, so Bill obviously taught here at Pentucket. He was a teacher when I was a student. He wasn't just a teacher. He was a huge support for our entire class. Our class went through some particularly challenging times, and Bill was there to help support us through all of that. When I became a teacher at Pentucket, Bill was a colleague, and Bill was always able to do just as he does here frequently, give us just, hey, here's some point blank advice about, based on my experience, this may not be the popular thing to do, but this is the right thing to do. And of course, even after that, after Bill retires, he goes and continues his role in education. So, when you talk about lifelong learning and lifelong educators and committing oneself to the betterment of their community, I just, Mr. Buell, on behalf of everyone you ever ran, just thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. And Madam Chair, that's what I have.
Great. Bill, yes, I also want to thank you for your years of service to Pentucket. You were a teacher, you belong to the PEF, you're a school committee member, and you have served this community well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Emily, sorry.
Oh, Emily?
I at least couldn't see what Justin was talking about in terms of the surveys. So I have a question, I guess. Were there chances for the staff to respond in open-ended ways,
Yeah, so
just
there are
multiple
open-ended
choice?
questions, but only on the technology. Again, mine was just a template, and the principals weren't taking mine and duplicating it. They might have duplicated parts, but they needed to tweak it for what they were looking to get. So I didn't include open-ended in mine because it just didn't make any sense, but the principals certainly may have. I won't know that until I meet with them on Friday.
Okay, because if they haven't, I would strongly encourage them to revisit that with their staff. I, as an educator, find, and actually as a parent as well, find that often the questions that are being asked to us as staff or us as parents don't totally get at some of the biggest concerns that are coming from the other side. And often the choices are forced choice questions that limit the option for us to give the response that actually needs to be heard, short of finishing the survey and then taking the time to go send an email to the person or people who need to, which nobody really has time to do. So.
Anyone else? Lisa?
I wanted to thank Bill very much for his service to the school district and to the school committee. I'm going to miss him. And I also want to ask Justin about the survey as well. I think the teachers are under a tremendous amount of stress and strain right now. And I'm just wondering, how much, how are they doing socially and, not socially, but emotional, the emotional support, because they're under a tremendous amount of strain, both, the hybrid and the remote teachers. And I wonder how much support they have. And I know that there's no answers, but I hope, that if the teachers are given a survey that, that the answers that they're given, like Emily had asked if it was multiple choice, whatever the teachers feel they need, I think, they're the ones that are, in the trenches. And if they have suggestions, recommendations, or whatever, it's really being looked at. Because I don't want to lose the teachers over this. I don't want to lose any of them. Everybody's working really, really hard. But if they're not getting, support that they need, or emotional support that they need, and they're just down and out stressed, you don't want them to get burnt out and leave.
Yeah, and there's a couple of components to that, Ms. O'Connor, right? You've got first the support, that's academic support, which is why this survey is so important, and that academic support is you've got these new tools. And I'll say this forever. You mentioned teachers. I'll say paraeducators, custodians, administrators, it doesn't matter. Like, I don't care how experienced you are. The difference between a first-year teacher and a 20-year veteran is almost identical. The big difference is the first-year teacher is probably more likely to know and catch on to that technology more quickly. They just haven't mastered the content and the curriculum. The 20-year veteran probably has a good mastery of the curriculum, but now they're being asked to go ahead and do something they never had to do before. So we are all reliving, all of us, and teachers, obviously, working with the students, we're all reliving our first year of teaching and our first year in our jobs. And that first year, yeah, it is extremely challenging, and that's in a normal setting. And when we take that normal setting, you put that on a backdrop of a pandemic, that's a whole different ballgame. So because you're not just dealing with the stresses of your job, you're dealing with the stresses of your life outside of your job, and those can be extremely significant. So the social emotional well-being, there's an extent to which the school can give advice of where the teachers can go get support. And we certainly have some limitations, but always, administrators' doors or the building administrators, particularly, a great spot for them to start with. If they need additional support, we can certainly do that. And I know Mr. Conway and I have talked to multiple teachers and had numerous conversations about all sorts of issues. And it's not, again, it's not just teachers, it's everybody. And you'll see some of the information in the presentation when we go over, us talking about that. I don't know if it was Ms. Tiller or Ms. Lapata mentioned it, but it is the expectations. It's the expectations that are put on them by, certainly me. It's the expectations that are put on them by the parents. It's the expectations that are put on them by themselves. And some of those are reasonable expectations. Some of them are unreasonable. And we know more than anything, educators are programmed, typically programmed, and mentally they're pleasers. They want to get out there and do everything they can for the kids. And again, I don't care if we're talking about a para-educator to a custodian, administrator, teacher. That's why we do what we do. And when you have that mentality and someone's asking, like if you're working a remote teacher and a parent's asking you, we need more, the inclination of the teacher say, sure. So it is like, it's managing expectations, I think, is a big piece of what we've been trying to do and shifting around to make things easier, for sure.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Does anyone have any more questions? Okay, new business. We will be discussing the hybrid learning update.
All right, so Madam Chair, I'm going to give you this heads up. I'm going to go into a share screen mode here, and we'll see how well this works. But what we've done is this is one singular PowerPoint, but in it is several different pieces. I know we're going to talk about hybrid remote learning curriculum update, and I'll tell everybody up front, this is just meant to be a very direct and honest assessment of where we are, where we started, and where we're going and why. So first, just let's look at the background, and I've done this on purpose. You see, the background of the PRSD back to school pandemic model. I'm going to keep on using that word, pandemic model, because we're in a pandemic, and I think it's very important for people to understand this is not a normal time. So first thing to know about this is, obviously, this was developed in July, and yes, we did involve, when that was developed, we had an idea of what we wanted to do. We ran it through, we had discussions with some union leadership, and what we came up with made sense given the parameters. And then in early August, it was approved by the school committee. But that was early August. We're 2.5 months later, and there's been a tremendous number of changes, and there's still a whole lot of questions. So let's just go back and look at this and rewind this model. When this model was rolled out, cohort A, they were in person Tuesday and Thursday, and Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they were going to be remote. Cohort B, Wednesday, Friday, remote the other days. And you can see the maximum 70 days. That's because if you project that out over the course of the year, it ends up being somewhere around 70 days is what they would have for in-person instruction. Cohort C, they were Monday to Friday. And again, so if you're viewing, you're wondering, well, why is my child not in cohort C? So cohort C are our programs, our district programs. Those are your individuals who are high needs, who during the summertime might have extensive loss, so they're in extended school year programs. That's not for just any person. But that maximum they would get is 170 days, because remember, we lopped off the 10 days to do professional development. That was statewide. So those are the cohorts that were coming to school. Then you had cohort D, the Florida virtual. Remember and recall, Florida virtual was not something we knew about in March, April, June, or July. We learned about Florida virtual, like I think it was a day or a couple days before the school committee presentation. So this was not something we were well versed on or that we knew was going on. We learned about it as we were developing the plan. We knew there was going to be something, so we put it in the model, but we didn't know what it was. So Florida virtual was brand spanking new. And again, nobody in our district, no one in any really area had ever been experienced Florida virtual until they unveiled it. And then you have the cohort D, the remote students, the Pentucket remote students. And the intent for them was similar to online, except they were going to go, remember in the spring, teachers were posting assignments. So these students were going to go see what their teachers were posting. And they would have a little more support than the Florida virtual, but it was not going to be a level of support that was going to be intensive, where they were going to spend a big chunk of time with the students. And the reason for that was because there was no first, we didn't know what we had for people who were willing, because remember, August 4th, teachers aren't even back yet. So we actually asked teachers early in August to tell us what they might want to be doing, or who would qualify to do remote and who wouldn't. But it was never intended to have, hey, let's have some in-depth synchronous learning for that PRSD remote group. That was never the intention, because we knew we couldn't run 3 simultaneous school systems. By the way, there's a lot of slides here, so that's okay. So this is a slide I put there. I want you to just read this. So let's look, if you look at the left-hand column, and we're going to compare what we're doing now to when you were in the 6th grade, or even just 2 years ago, the 6th grade here. So right now, 83%, right around 83% of our students are going to get the maximum of 70 in-person days. Those are the students who are doing AB. 11% get 0% in person. They're not getting anything live in person. And that's throughout the year. And 6% of our students, about 6%, get 170 days. And that's, again, those are your high needs cohort C students who are here. So why don't we just contrast those numbers? So you have 70 days, 70 days, 70 days for 83% of our students. When you were in 6th grade, you more than likely had 180 days of in-person instruction. So when we ask ourselves, okay, are we going to be able to match what we do at 180 days? Can we match that in 70 days? If someone tells you yes, they're selling you some miracle that doesn't exist. It's not. So is in-person really a big deal? Can't technology and virtual just overcome that? Well, side-by-side comparison. And this here is just saying, okay, when you're in person, you've got a teacher in front of you. The teacher's able to talk through the curriculum, walk around, check on students, even at 6 feet apart. They're able to communicate with each other and socialize. And there's, even at 6 feet apart, there's recess. There's these other opportunities to have interactions. And when you're in person, there's a whole bunch of adults that have eyes on you. When you're walking down the hall, when you're out at recess. So if something comes up, or if there's needs, those can be addressed. When you're virtual, you're by yourself. You are behind the computer by yourself, and you can go through that curriculum, no problem, right? As long as you can. The remote teacher is going to check in with you, and that's the way it's set up, right? They're going to check in with you periodically to provide support. There's not a whole bunch of adults that have eyes on you. So the social interactions that they have are going to be really left up to the parents or whoever the caregivers are. They're the ones who have to schedule time for that child to go out and interact with other individuals. And the reality of virtual is that the families bear the brunt of that schedule in providing that structure. So another question, can any virtual, including the students in the pandemic, hybrid model, can any virtual replace in-person teaching? So there's the answer to that question, in my professional opinion. No. So at younger ages in particular, how are you going to do it? Yes, we can put the curriculum up on a platform for someone to go devour and regurgitate. Yes, we can do that. But the in-person, the social skills, the mental health, the mental well-being, all those social skill developments, that doesn't exist. So can virtual replace that? The answer is no. It's one thing when you've gone through 12th grade, kindergarten, pre-K through 12th grade, and you're in college or grad school and you're taking an online course because you've had those social interactions, you've developed those skills. It's a very different animal when you're learning how to read or when you're learning the scientific method or scientific process. It's a very different animal. So that brings up this question. Are we shortchanging our children across the US, and I mentioned the United States here, by having virtual and not going fully in person? So there's obviously, we know there's districts neighboring us that are full virtual right now. So, and this is one thing I know you've all heard, our kids are behind. Well, so are we shortchanging them? So again, in my professional opinion, no. And the answer is no, because you're shortchanging them relative to who? If we're talking about relative to the 6th grade that you attended or the 6th grade 2 years ago, then yes, because they were in person for 180 days. But there are very few school districts that are in person for all 170 days. So it's relative. So we're not shortchanging anybody because it's relative to everything else that's going on. And the other part of this is we're not shortchanging them because by maintaining the model that we have, by keeping that distance and making sure that students aren't exposed, even if there were a positive case in the school, we're not risking shutting down schools. Had we not selected that model, had the school committee not selected that model and gone instead for, hey, we're going to go full all in, or we're going to do the 3 feet apart, we would right now have at least 2 schools, possibly 3 schools that would be closed right now today. There would be no in-person learning. So no, we are not shortchanging our students. So are we shortchanging our elementary students at PRSD? And here's the data for that. So this is the beginning of the year, the key literacy indicator. So if you're a parent of an elementary school student, you probably, your child, or you received a message saying that we're going to be doing our screenings. And we do screenings at the start of every year. By the way, we've been doing those screenings. Mr. Conway, how many years have we been doing those screenings?
This was year number 3.
There you go. And how many, that's right. So we'll get to there in a little bit, right? So we can take a look at this data. Remember, this is at the start of the year. And if I remember this, so by the end of the year, we want to be around 80%. Is that right?
Ideally, if our numbers are 80%, we're doing pretty well.
Okay. So 2019, this is the start. So there is no pandemic going on. It's not hybrid. It's every single day. So you can say, it's fair to say, when you look at first grade, 56% at or above grade level. And then you look at first grade 2020, wow, that's 4% higher. But we know there's a problem with that, right? Because that's a different cohort of students. That's a different group of children. But we also know that first grade, 56% at or above grade level, they went into second grade. And you can look at second grade. They're at 58% at or above. So I'm pointing this out to just say, when we're talking about shortchanging, and you can go down second grade 65 to third grade 55. Mr. Conway, do you want to talk about that one real quick?
Yeah, so the first and second grade is a similar assessment. And then in third grade, the assessment changes. The indicator is a different one. And then from third through eighth, it's all really the same one. So you can definitely go cohorts from grade 3 on down, and you could look at the first and the second.
Right. So when you look at second grade going to third grade, it's a different assessment. So it's not something, but let's go to third grade, 54 to 53, a loss of 1%. Statistically significant? Maybe, may not be. Fourth grade, 49 to 49, stayed the same. 48 to 51, that's an increase. In hybrid, that's an increase. 58 to 58 stayed the same. 46 to 47, an increase. So are we dropping off? No, we're not. And literacy, again, is one of those skills that children use every single day, whether they're on the computer reading stuff or they're opening up a book. Like, that's something they're constantly doing. You know what they don't constantly do? They don't open up a book and do an AP Calc problem or they don't do some trigonometry. So let's take a look at the math indicators. And here is math. So we went 5th through 8th on this. So you can see 5th grade through 8th grade. So the beginning of the year, the math indicators, 45 to 42, that's a loss of 3%. 48 to 47, that's a loss of 1%. 36 to 34, that's a loss of 2%. So is that shortchanging our children? No, they're in a pandemic. They were going to school every single day. And in March 13th was their last day. They were getting in-person instruction for math. Math is a concrete, you use it or you lose it. If you ask me to go back right now and figure out a derivative of 2x cubed plus 4x, I'm going to have to think about that for a long while. I might have to look it up to figure it out. So you either use that or it's gone. So you struggle. So it's going to take time for that to come back. And Mr. Conway is going to go into a little more depth later on about this. So are we shortchanging our students at PRSD? No. That's my professional opinion is no. Why? Because everyone's being shortchanged, and that includes adults. Adults are being shortchanged. Their normal lives are not normal anymore. The entire educational environment is so completely different from what it was previously that everyone, technically, if we're going to say everyone's being shortchanged. And the incredible thing is that right now, when you look at those numbers, the beginning of the year numbers, that our children are still meeting those standard areas, which those standards are built for a normal school environment. Those standards are built upon 180 days of in-person instruction. They're not built on virtual. They're not built on a hybrid. So even with those standards in place, our children are in some at grade levels sometimes better than where they were a year ago, and sometimes slightly below. So here's the reality. Anybody know what this is?
Model A.
Well, yeah, so this is the very last, good, please, good. This is the very last, the 15 millionth was the very final Ford Model T. This is what we adopted in the beginning of August. Like when we adopted it, this was brand spanking new, first ever, hey, this is amazing. And we knew it wasn't amazing. We knew it was a model. It was a whole spectrum. But we also know that we need to make adjustments because even though it's only been 2.5 months, our model is somewhat antiquated. So why did we even vote this to start? Well, we voted to start because one, it got kids back. These were the comments that some of you all made. It got students back in front of their teachers, even if it was just for 2 days a week. It gave families the choice of whether or not they wanted their child to come to school or whether they wanted them to stay at home. And if they decided to stay, it gave them the choice of they wanted to hop into virtual, which again at the time was unknown, or if they wanted to do the PRSD version. And it also made sure that we, in that model, that we're not going to be close contacts. And I will even say, just 2.5 months ago, I don't think we all fully understood what a close contact meant. Like, I recall a meeting where Ms. Blanchard had mentioned, oh, Merrimack College, that's actually not the distance. And she was able to cite that Department of Public Health guidelines, which is what we now know is a very common rule. And the other part of that was the 3 boards of health. They looked at the plan, they understood, they did building walkthroughs, and it got their approval. So given the health information we had, that was the decision the school committee made. So do we have data on how people feel about it now? So here's what we know a little more. This is a month into the school year, not a month later from when you selected the model, but we've gone from about 200 remote students to 274. That doesn't necessarily indicate that students are saying, hey, I want out of this in person, I want to go to fully remote. A part of those numbers are a result of children being close contacts because of a community spread in their family or friends. So they're having to go. There's been shifts in protocols from the Department of Public Health, DESE, and what we've shifted based on what we saw happening. To both Ms. Tiller and Ms. Lapata's points, I didn't make this after they said it, right? Stress and anxiety among all stakeholders remains high. All stakeholders, and that term stakeholders is all inclusive of children, teachers, social workers, parents, administrators, custodians, food service. it doesn't matter where we are. The stress level is high. And I think there was a quote a couple of days ago, someone said, and it's, the country is just tired of following restrictions and having these restrictions. When you put restrictions on something, those levels of anxiety, they're going to increase, and stress increases. They are high for everybody. And this last part speaks to the teaching part of it as well. So even with all this happening, in 180 days when I was in 6th grade, you had to cover a curriculum. Well, teachers are only seeing students in 83% of the case for 70 days, and they're expected to cover the full curriculum. That inherently is extremely stressful. You might recall that in the spring, they went to power standards, and they said, these are the things you have to cover. Don't worry about everything else. But there's an inherent problem with that if you keep on falling behind, there's going to be too big of a gap for you to make up. And when I say keep on falling behind, that's based on the vertical alignment of how the curriculum for the state is designed. So if you miss out this piece and you miss this piece, then trying to get here without the mathematical know-how of how to do it, it's just not possible. So again, teachers have been surveying students to building app, and I told you about that. We do a weekly troubleshoot with the building administrators on question and answer and things to consider with them. And so they bring up what's going on. And then we have the anecdotal sources, email, phone calls that they receive, that we receive. And again, it's anecdotal because it's not always the best source to say this is where it's coming from, but it is a source. So the strengths, you have the personal interactions, the face-to-face instruction, there's socialization, there's some sense of normalcy. There's no school spread. And we have 70 to 72, somewhere around 70 in-person school days. That's the strengths. The weaknesses. So they're only here for 2 days a week. There's a finite number of children you can fit in space. There's no daily interaction with the teacher. And again, that 70 is on both. 70 to 72 that's the maximum we can get right now. So I said school spread, again, I said this before. You can go back and read this slide 100 times. It's not going to change. 0% of positive cases are because of, that should say school spread. There should say school spread right here. They're because of school spread. 100% are because of community spread. So will we be shifting to the full in-person model? Remember, on the whole spectrum, full in-person was one of the The recommendations, no, because we're going to compromise that distance, which means all of a sudden, we would have been closing schools down, or if there is a positive case, we're going to have to close down schools because people would have been close contacts, and that would have been a lot of close contacts. So recommendation would be no, because if we do that, we're putting our number one priority at risk, and that is the health and safety of our students and employees. So can't we just add students to classes where there are smaller numbers? So that's a great question. A great question. So went down, sat, and did out all the calculations. And this is based on information the principals had gotten to me. And I'll explain what this means. So Page has 30 cohorts. That means there's basically 15 classes, an A class and a B class. So they have 30 cohorts. So Page has about 8 possible situations where they could have 1 or more students added. Bagnell, 42 cohorts, they have about 6 possible for just 1 more. Merrimack, 40 for 1 more. So once you start getting to middle school and high school, so middle school has 400 plus cohorts. And you can understand the complexities. When you're in elementary, you're in one single class. Or in your middle, you're going from here to here to here. You go into 7 different courses. So there might be space for you in one class, but another class there isn't. And we can't very well say to a middle schooler, hey, why don't you show up for 3 periods, 1st, 5th, and 6th, but then go home. You can't do that. We can't have them in the building because it's too much space. But middle school is interesting. 7th grade is an area that you can look at and say, okay, well, most of those core classes are relatively small, but there's a complexity. Their core classes comprise 4 of their classes. There's still 3 more classes that they're involved in, where sometimes there's high school students in those classes because it might be a foreign language class, and there might be a math class as well. It depends on the situation. And then high school is just even far more complicated because it's double the number of students. So if you were to go about doing that, the question is going to be, okay, if you can add 1, 2, or 3 children, how are you going to decide who gets in? Who are those kids? And what's the metric you're going to use? Are you going to use how far behind they are? What does far behind mean? Are you going to use, okay, well, this parent complains a lot, so that's the person I'm going to put in? Or are you going to use the student whose parent doesn't complain at all because the parent isn't really engaged in the student's academic? And so who's making that ethical decision? And I don't think there is a correct ethical decision to make there. And not only that, but there's also when those numbers, so even aside from that, that third bullet point, so as you saw there, not all the schools are equal. Right? And I understand that they're never going to be, like, because they're 3 different towns. But is it okay if students have high needs or higher needs in one town that they can't go up, take up those spaces in this town where they be getting what they need? And again, you have to measure that. How do you determine who's got the greatest need to the least amount of need? The crossing over of cohorts, again, that'd be something that the local health agents, we'd have to talk to them about. And then there's like language programs remote. Those numbers don't necessarily include those students who actually are in. So while I think Merrimack had 840 sections and 8 opportunities to add a student, or maybe 2, we don't know that's necessarily true because there are students who are in language programs that might be moving in there. And if you have students who come out of remote and into hybrid, so when I calculated this out, I used the number, so I gave us a little bit of a buffer. Because if students come out of remote into hybrid, they need a space to go. And we're given that a certain amount of time. I think 3 weeks or 4 weeks is what the state has said they want us to have this done by. So what about cohorts A and B on their remote days? Can't we do something better? So, and this is, I know, so this question has come up quite a bit. Right, it comes up from some parents bring this up, and what we actually are working with our teachers right now. We met with a group of teachers yesterday. Ms. Trotter was there to look at the possibility of piloting some live streaming courses. So them to live stream a portion of their day for a short period of time when their students are remote. And if you're at elementary, that could be a morning meeting. It might be a section of a math lesson that you just say, hey, this is what we're going to cover today. You go over some things, and then the students go off and do their own. So we're working towards that right now. Nothing's been solidified, but we think we're making progress. And not only do we think we're making progress, we've heard rumors that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed may be making this a requirement. We know it is a requirement in several states in the United States, but again, I think those states may have different technology pieces that Massachusetts may not necessarily have. So, yeah, I mean, that is something that is being looked at. So we'll look at the pandemic fully remote programs in a second. So I'm going to stop first about the hybrid learning. And I'm going to go back here. And I'm going to stop sharing this for a second. So does anybody have any questions on just the hybrid? We're still going to talk about the remote and the curriculum piece. And I see Chris has got her hand.
Chris has her hand up.
So I have a couple of questions. One, the teachers who spoke somewhat touched on it regarding the additional workload that they may have by requiring some of these live streaming opportunities, and how does that impact their planning, I guess. Another one would be one of the things that we said early on why we can't do some of this work live streaming is because of privacy issues. So what not necessarily has changed, but what has kind of come out of that, and is it still a concern, or how do we get around that concern? And then another thing that has been kind of thrown around is I know people are doing surveying of the teachers, but was any of the surveying done before kind of the ball started rolling on these changes, and was there teacher input, or what did it look like?
Yeah, great question. So, Mr. Conway, you can hop in here wherever you want, but let me go, and I'll just say first, when we started talking about some of these changes for the opportunities to do the live streaming, one, we know that there are many districts that do live streaming. Some districts do live streaming all day long, and they live stream their classrooms. They have 360 cameras or something like that in their classrooms. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that we do not have that technology. And we don't have the finance to put something like that in there. And not only that, it would also necessitate a tremendous amount of PD to get people to figure out how to use that. So it's not uncommon for people to live stream. Yes, we absolutely discussed this with our attorneys before we started doing it. There, we have a sheet that all families had to sign off on, that they understand it's like the acceptable use policy, but it was an additional piece that get added on there that when something's being live streamed out of a classroom, that it's for that student only, it's not for their family. So there were those parts. I think one of the pieces that's really important to clarify is that we knew we're going to be making some adjustments. And there was a group of individuals among the teachers who were definitively, and there's several of them were working with a dozen or more teachers because they were working with students who were remote. So they were working with a dozen or more teachers and trying to get that all coordinated. And it was incredibly overwhelming. So actually the problem was brought to us. And then we, by the union, and we sat down and had a conversation with the union about what would be ways we could solve this. And there was a lot of back and forth. I know Mr. Conway had some conversations, so we came up with some solutions for it. And on the face of it, absolutely, everything looked like it. I mean, it makes good sense. The struggles with this are always going to be, again, well, first, it's new, right? So again, trying to do something brand new after you've been doing something different for a month, that's going to add additional stress. Absolutely the case. The second part of this is that there's a perception of what is expected. And that expectation was not to stream a whole entire classroom. It was not expected to capture the students who were in the class or watch the teacher running around the classroom. It was just to do what's, I think, several teachers are already doing, and that's live streaming what they're doing up on the whiteboard for a small amount of time, and then students going on and working out the problems on their own when they're remote. And while the teacher, again, this is always the case. Like we've said this to teachers, we've said this to parents extensively. A teacher in the classroom is to be focusing on the children that are in front of them, not on the children who are possibly coming in remotely. Like they cannot do both. They're only focusing in. The idea of the live stream is now the student who has the assignments, because the teachers have posted it up, they might get clarification. If you're in elementary school, it might be a morning meeting where you're going over the calendar, the work for the day, what has to be done. And at the high school and middle school level, you might be there for the first 10, 15 minutes and say, all right, this is what I'm going to be covering today, X, Y, and Z. And then you move on to the next part. And that student who's remote, they're off doing their remote piece. So that was the concept behind it, but it was collaboratively done. What did not happen, and we have some groups, we did not have a group of elementary teachers. It was, I guess it was our understanding, because we had these discussions that would have been worked out, and it wasn't, and that's definitely our fault. I mean, that's definitely our fault. So, we met with some group yesterday just to try to move forward and get their more specific feedback on how that would impact, so that they get our feedback on clarification on what we were really looking to accomplish.
And I think it's important. The intention is certainly not to add to anyone's workload.
No. Oh, yeah.
If anything, it was meant to reduce a workload.
Yeah.
And that our understanding was they felt overwhelmed with the planning on Monday, they were recording lots of videos, screencasts, and all of these, and planning them out for the whole week, even all the way into the following Monday. And that was taking an incredible amount of time. And that simply by live streaming, you wouldn't have to do that, right? The portions that you otherwise are trying to provide instruction for, the kids who are home on those given days would just watch you teach that, whether it was a 20-minute mini lesson, and then everyone at home knows what they're doing. Great, go do your work. I'm here now working with the rest of the kids on the rest of the content. So the intention was actually to reduce the workload, not to add more. And I think it's fair to say that what that looks like at K-3 is really different than what it might look like at grades 4, 5, and 6, and certainly what it might look like differently on grades 7 and 12. So I think those variances are the things we're discussing with the teachers now, and trying to work out more of the details so we can move forward to address some of the things that we think are some of the holes or the flaws, so that we can make improvements, but without adding to the workload. And we understand that teachers really feel overwhelmed. I think Dr. B's really hit on it. Educators around the area all feel that way. They're being asked to do things they've never had to do before. And at the same time, parents are overwhelmed and stressed because they have to sort of fill in the gaps there, and they're trying to work. And it's a lot of, the pressure pot is actually building. So, oddly, from our perception of what we thought would be a reduction in load was not necessarily interpreted that way, but it's also maybe not understanding or thinking about how it might work too. So we're working about what that might look like moving forward, where we might be able to pilot some of it in some spots, and then compare what is it like versus preparing recorded videos versus providing the live streaming. And again, the camera's not on all day. It's on very specific direct instruction purposes, and then the kids go do their work that they need to go do.
And always the goal is, what is the balance of optimizing the student learning opportunity, and at the same time trying to shed some of that burden that the teachers are currently working with, even if this didn't exist, even if like half of it didn't exist. So what is that? What does that look like? And the intent on this was to shed some of that burden and provide some additional support to those students, and bring teachers into the classroom every day. Emily, we got you. We see you. Go ahead. You can go.
So I'm super glad to hear that you guys are working to problem solve with the elementary teachers in particular, because I am very concerned for the mental health of all of our staff, not just the teachers, but all of the staff. And obviously, you guys know, I live this all day, every day as a teacher, as a parent. I'm working the 14-hour days that they are. Like, we're all there. We get that. But it's really important to me that you guys are taking into consideration the mental health of the staff, because in putting kids first, we have to consider that the people who are teaching and caring for these kids make a difference. And if they are at the edge, they're on the edge of tears, on the edge of anger, any of those things, because of the burden that's being put on them, we are not putting our kids first. So thank you for working to problem solve with the elementary teachers. I had a couple of questions from reading the plan. And Mr. Conway mentioned, the idea, particularly at the elementary level, of, live streaming part of morning meeting or live streaming a mini lesson. And that definitely makes sense. That is my new life as well, although we're doing all day mostly. But I am confused about how that will work with the families on their remote days, because the families on their remote days are basically being told that they, work through these different lessons on their own time frame. So in order to decrease the teacher's workload, those students have to log in and be present for that mini lesson. Otherwise, the teachers are going to have to find another way to deliver that content to those students who, because their parents are working or whatever, aren't able to access the mini lesson in live time. So that's one concern. And the other piece that I was a little concerned about was I loved how clear the language was around that the kids at home will be watching this as though they were watching a video. But then there was another point where it said that those kids could ask clarifying questions and those kind of things. And so I'm wondering if you were thinking of running this almost like a workshop model, where if the teacher's running a 10-minute mini lesson, then the kids are breaking up into their workshop groups, and the first group would be checking in, or the teacher's first group would be checking in with the remote kids, something like that. And finally, I wanted to just sort of throw out there that I really think we need to be careful in considering the timeline of pushing this out, because I think that if it can be rolled out, like you said, pilot it with some people, see how that works. Not totally grassroots style, but to work the kinks out where we don't have the technological support for these teachers. We don't have another adult in the room to supervise the screen versus the kids in front of them. That if we could roll this out start with, 1 10-minute block a day, see how you can manage that. I think that that's going to go a long way towards this feeling more manageable for the teachers.
Yeah, I think, Ms. Dwyer, you have some good points, and I think some of them are actually what we're discussing with the teachers now. And again, I think what it looks like at 7 to 12 is really different than what it looks like at the elementary school.
100%.
And if you're doing like a morning meeting, there is some level of expectation that the students are sort of interacting with something like that. I mean, that's sort of the intent. But if you're live streaming your 20-minute math lesson, the students at home can essentially turn their cameras off and listen in, watch the lesson. And then before you send them on their way to go do their work, you would at that point, you could check in with them to make sure they understand everything and to clarify any misconceptions. And then they go off and they do their work, and they're generally doing the same work that the kids are that would be in the classroom. And that allows the curriculum to continue to move forward, to make sure that you're not repeating lessons on the next day. So
for sure, that just only works if the kids are present in reducing the workload.
Yeah, and I think there's the Department of Ed has a very clear expectation that kids at home on remote days should generally be following the school schedule. We initially, knowing we weren't going to have live instruction on those days, certainly allowed some flexibility of what that would look like for a family. But if these are components or the part where you're getting that instruction, you would need to be present for them, and that would need to happen, and parents would need to understand that adjustment. I think the teachers are fearful that we'll do this and then they're going to realize they're still going to have to do the recorded videos for other people. And I don't think that's a fair burden to place on teachers, for sure. If you're doing live instruction, that's the curriculum on the day that you're home and you need to tune in to be able to hear it. And it would be all subject matters all day long. It would be isolated to some really specific ones that you felt like would be best delivered through a live presentation that way.
Absolutely. I think that, again, when we talk about timeline, I think that that's something that parents who have been offered flexibility and are maybe working from home and are saying, oh yeah, like I'll do the stuff it's really hard for my kids, like during my lunch break or whatever, that I think we need to give the parents some lead time on this as well as the teachers, because it's going to be a shift, a logistical shift for some of them. I'm not saying it's not the correct thing. I'm just saying I think that we need to be clear in our expectations of the parents and give them time to make the adjustments they need to make. And the other thing I will say is that I do think that some, whether it's paraprofessional or whoever is around, when you're talking about 5 and 6 year olds, when you have 10 kids in front of you and you have 10 kids on a screen, it is not effective for one adult to try to answer the questions for the kids on the screen and try to get the kids in the classroom started with academic tasks at this time of year. So I think that that's something, again, very different for very different grade levels, but I have experience and expertise at this age level, and I'm really good at routines. And I can tell you for a fact that it's just not a one-person job yet. And I think that that's something we need to provide support for the teachers with, or give them some training and practice in a more specific workshop model so that they can focus their attention and do one thing well instead of trying to clone themselves. That's a different subject.
Thanks, Emily.
Can I ask a question back there? I see my
Go
hand.
ahead, Joanna.
Okay, I have just a few questions. First, when you're talking about if we move to live streaming in the classroom, like for a 40-minute lesson, if we could get teachers to just record their live stream and then post it, that just alleviates a lot of problems for parent, like especially parents of young kids, who get scheduling issues. It's just available 24/7.
Yep.
It's really just.
Yeah, I think that's probably, as you record it, it's a shorter, it's not recording an hour and 15 minutes, which it'll probably be 2 hours and 15 minutes when we're done here. But right, it's a shorter window, and then you post it. You might not be able to post it till later.
Right.
And it's a short piece.
I also think
it's a possible solution. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think that there's going to have to be some discretion, right? If, again, because we don't know what's happening in the classroom, that classroom teacher does know what's happening in that classroom. So if they're in a video, something happens in the classroom, then that might be something that can't be posted.
Right,
And
that one doesn't get posted.
And we've tried to work on trying to find ways where there's secure networking, where only specific email addresses can access videos, but obviously we're a two-man tech crew, so we're trying to get that, see if it is possible, to see if we can do something for that, because I think that'd make everybody feel a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, most of the platforms, that's what they do, they require a specific email address.
Yep.
So then my other two questions are, I'm kind of unclear on what's going on with the Department of Ed. I thought that they were going to require live streaming in the imminent future, so it sounds like you guys have a slightly different take on that?
Well, so I will tell you, yeah, we don't, there's no official take on this yet. We got word on Thursday morning. It was Thursday morning, I think Mr. Conway had got some information, and I asked MASS person to please investigate that further, because we don't want this sneaking up on us as we're trying to make a shift or like tweak. We don't want this sneaking up on us and them saying, okay, you need to start at this date.
Right. And the phrase live streaming is not necessarily
We don't know what that
exactly
is.
what
That's right.
they're going to intend. I think their expectation is, and we're not talking about the kids who are fully remote, we're talking about the kids who are home on their opposite days, that they don't go the whole day without some form of interaction with a school staff member. That's what I think the Department of Ed is wrestling with, of how do they create that language so that districts can implement that in a way that makes sense. And, if it's academic related, great. It doesn't have to be necessarily, but again, we have not received that exact guidance yet around their expectations. We expect it soon, but.
And so then my last question related to that is, if we are told that like, all students need to be live, all teachers have to live stream their first 15 minutes of class or something, what is our technology situation going to allow that?
Yeah, so this is actually one of the couple of the things we don't know, right? So that's why, and we've asked when we did the when we shifted on Thursday, Friday for the high school, I asked specifically for them to contact Mr. Seymour or Mr. Conant when there was any technology issues, so that we could look at the monitoring, and Mr. Buck could go out there and see what was happening with the bandwidth. We had reports at the start of the school year that a couple of, I think, Paige and Donahue, I don't know about Sweetser, but they were struggling with that on Mondays because on Mondays they do some live streaming with their children. And they were having some difficulties, so Mr. Buck went over there and made some adjustments or updates. And I just don't know the status, but even yesterday, in the meeting we had yesterday, we heard over Paige that might continue to be an issue. And I just asked them to make sure that no matter what, they contact their building principal and Mr. Buck, so that we know what's going on, because yes, that would definitely have an impact on what we're able to do. And that's always going to be the Department of Elementary. They can't require us to do something we're not physically able to do.
So that's their famous line, right? Pending funding, or what's the phrase they use? I think it also depends upon what we're actually asking folks to do. To simply stream instruction live out to students via Google Meet link, as long as the students on the other end can shut their cameras off, I can say with fairly good confidence that we can handle that from a technology standpoint. One device streaming out, and that works. The moment it starts to get busy and every classroom's doing it and all the cameras are on and the kids are interacting, that's going to probably put a strain on pretty much any district's technology bandwidth capacity. But I think we have to remember we also have half the kids in the building on devices than what we normally would.
Yeah. I think my concern is that, like, Amesbury School, the reason why they said they didn't want this, they said they couldn't handle it.
Yeah. So I think it depends. If you're trying to do something live with interaction and you need cameras on, that's going to take a lot more pull.
Yep.
If the expectation is more basic and it's a shorter window of time and it's only putting out and not really necessarily interacting, then that we can probably handle. There are districts, Westford is doing it, and they're just doing Chromebooks the same way we are. I looked into it too because you wondered what they were using for devices.
Absolutely.
They're just doing with Chromebooks.
Yeah, and I think so that's why we know there's some apps that are just they chew up massive bandwidth. Streaming music on YouTube chews up a massive amount of bandwidth. So you can't have everybody hopping on YouTube streaming music at that point because it'll disrupt everything else. But even at our big meetings that we have with 500 whatever superintendents and assistant superintendents with the commissioner, they cameras off, and that way, because when we started having those meetings, like the first month or two, there was disruption after disruption, breaking, because it was taking up too much width. So yes, those are things we're very conscious of. When it comes up, we'll have to troubleshoot it.
Lisa, did you have a question?
Yeah, make sure I'm not on mute. The testing, the evaluations that you did, those were just on the kids that are hybrid, correct?
No, we did the fully remote students too. We offered, you mean the screening assessments that were mentioned earlier?
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
all
assessment.
students had those done. For those who were remote, we had folks reach out to them and work with them. We had a few of them who refused, and that's okay. We didn't force the issue.
Okay. And my question is too, I know that you mentioned that you had attorneys look over waivers, if you will, for the video recording.
Yeah.
But I don't want anything to come back to us or the privacy of, our students. Like special ed students that might be having maybe a one-on-one in the classroom, because they need that level of service. Somebody that's getting services in the back of the classroom. Maybe a child that blurts out things. So a child that might have, Tourette's or tics or things like that. I just want to make sure that, like the cameras are in such a way that those children are not recorded, their population is not recorded.
Yeah, we've specifically the sort of the directions would be that the camera is focused on the teacher.
They're not,
Or the
you're not
whiteboard.
capturing other students on the camera.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that was it. And the recordings, though, those are just for the hybrid students, right? So there's no recordings being made for the fully remote students.
They would have access to it because there's no reason, why can't they?
Okay.
They're assigned to those classrooms. They have access to those Google Classrooms. Those are the same assignments they're getting, and that would be their instruction. The difference being that they're going to get their support and questions answered by the remote support teachers, not the classroom teachers.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Sure. So
Marie has a question.
So what kind of on Lisa's end, but not just special ed kids, but even general ed kids. I remember, and like you said, a lot has changed in the past month. Other things are being dictated now that weren't, being dictated to us before, and other requirements are being made. But going back to PRSD, and I think in early discussions we had discussed, that they be comfortable being recorded, and if their parents do sign a waiver. So let's just say, okay, like Brett and I are in the same class. and Brent's parents say, yeah, I don't have a problem with it. My parents say they do. So does that child get moved to a different class where they are recording? Because, I mean, how does that?
Yeah, so that comes back to that when something's being recorded, it's not, so like we're recording right now,
Yes.
that's not what the recording would be. The recording would be completely faced the other direction to where the teacher is and where the board is or where the calendar is, whatever they're discussing. It wouldn't be something that's of the whole classroom.
So the children are not on.
Right.
the
And I
video.
understand that, but even if they're not on there physically,
You have
there's
to-
background chatter, there's like, there
Yeah,
could
it-
be.
that-
It's hard, actually, like if we turn this computer around,
Mhm.
you would not be heard. And I even imagine Joanna is probably difficult to be heard from there up to this camera at home. She has to project her voice quite a bit.
So there is gonna be some sort of,
There,
there's gonna be some sort of, I'm gonna say it, but like, so you're teaching the class. So as a student sitting in your class in person, I'm gonna know that I'm not to ask a question, not to ask to go to the bathroom, not to do anything while you're on camera recording to people at home so that I'm not heard. You're not trying to address me while you're in front of a camera to.
no, I think you could, no, because the teacher in front is teaching the students who are in the class.
You would have to.
So
be
there
something-
can be interactions for sure. It's not meant to be like that everyone sits and listens to me for 20 minutes. Those at home are just listening in on the direct instruction. They may not hear your question. The teacher can repeat it if you know, if that's, but the teacher's focus is on the kids that are physically in the room.
But even if they do hear it, it's not an identifiable
Right.
information. Like there's not something that you know, oh,
Yeah.
this was, or the average person would not know.
And if there was a disruption of some sort, the teacher can mute the microphone and shut it off as well.
So should we go on to remote? learning?
Sure. So let me go back. So we're now going to talk about, that was just a hybrid, which that was almost half of our presentation. So we're going to go now on to the pandemic fully remote programs. Wanted to make sure you got the full flavor of what's going on. So Mr. Conway's going to talk quite a bit about this, but he and I will back and forth. But Mr. Conway, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. So who's involved in the fully remote programs? Well, Ms. Buteri, as of this week, is involved, and I've been working with her. We'll be meeting again tomorrow to make some of that transition. We now have about 275 students, so about a little under 40 are currently involved in the Florida virtual program. About 10 of them at the secondary level, and the rest at the elementary level. We started, as Dr. Bartholomew talked about, we started with 200 students, and that has crept up. But we've also had several students who started in fully remote and wanted to come back in hybrid. I think especially when people realize spread is not occurring in school, things are spread out, it's safe for them to do so. And we have 12 staff who are assigned to those students.
Are there challenges with fully remote? I don't think there are, but why don't you go ahead? Go ahead.
There certainly are, and we could go on for quite a bit about this. I think our challenges are, part of it is we approved this plan fairly early. We wanted to build in some flexibility and options for folks. And in doing so, we were never able to capitalize on what I'd call economy of scale. We've talked about this before. We were not really able to create a remote learning academy. It would have required more staff. Could we do it in a few grades here or there? We could. But even in doing that, you tie yourself into a number. And you have to build in greater flexibility even within that. So what we're finding is for the elementary students in the Florida program, it is actually requiring significantly more actual synchronous instruction from the instructor than what we were led to believe it was going to happen. At the secondary level, it's definitely more mandatory.
I have to qualify. I'm sorry, I have to qualify. So when, again, I'm going to go back.
Not that we were misled, but.
Right. Well, and I just want to remind everybody again what we said earlier. The Florida virtual schools is not something that we have ever experienced, ever. Not even when we passed the plan. We knew there was going to be some remote virtual school model, but we didn't know what it was. In fact, initially we were told it wasn't going to be up until sometime the start of October.
Right.
So All of this happened with extreme speed. And yes, we were given highlights and overviews, but none of us had interacted with it. So what Mr. Conway just said is important, that the level of engagement that would be required for an outside person, me as a teacher, to work with a student was not expected to be high at all. It was supposed to be minimal. And in a lot of instances, that's turned out not to be the case.
Yeah. So that's been challenging. And yet I think for parents who are able to backfill it at home, some of them may really like it and it works fairly well for them. It is a good platform. It just requires more actual instruction than we anticipated. So we have our staff spread out a little bit with that. And, we have outside of the Florida, in our own remote model, we've got some grade levels with 15 kids are remote and some with 35. So it varies greatly. We've seen an increased number of high school students requesting to go remote, which is another challenge. How do we provide high school students with actual instruction and content area rather than just work and videos? That is definitely a challenge for us. So, we're facing that. Our remote support teachers are coordinating curriculum and assignments from 16 different teachers across 2 grade levels. They might have 35 kids they're working with, but it's numerous teachers who, may generally in the same grade level be working on the same things at the same time, but not necessarily day by day. So they're working with smaller groups of kids. They are providing some live instruction, but it's a little hairy in order to put it all together for them.
And I would just say, I am a firm believer that you need to manage expectations. You need to manage the expectations of the students who are going into it. You need to manage the expectations of the teachers going into it. You need to manage the expectations of the parents who are going into it. Again, the problem is there's nothing to manage. We had no expectation to manage other than our intent was there would be minimal involvement because we knew this type of scenario was not sustainable for those teachers. So I see hands now. Do you want to answer questions now?
I just said, one question about, you said that students in the high school, some of them are shifting to remote, to the Florida virtual. Do you have an assessment?
Not to Florida, to our.
Just to our remote.
Yeah, so there's about 12 high school students in the last 2 weeks who have asked to go to remote learning. And in doing so, we don't really have anyone else to support them. There's no one to check in on them. So they're accessing their Google Classroom, they're doing their work, but there's no one really assigned to check in with them on a daily basis because we don't have that flexibility built in.
So again, I think it's an important part to drive home. When he says we don't have anybody, there are teachers who are already they're working with 16 different teachers and they have their caseload of however many students, and it's a large number of students. And the state recognizes that this is a problem. And because it's a problem, and this is, we're putting a bind, but that's why they give you the 3 to 4 weeks to make that transition.
And their guidance they issued yesterday actually spread that out to 6 weeks. So if a parent requests a change, we can say, we'll do it, but we can take up to 6 weeks to make that change.
And to be clear, we don't want it. We'd like to do it the next day.
Right.
It's just,
If a family doesn't want their kid in the building because they're fearful, I don't want to say you got to wait 6 weeks. I understand. So,
Mr. Conway, you got any data about the pandemic fully remote model? How people feel about it?
Yeah. So we did survey some parents. 80% of them said there's kids were spending between 3 and 6 hours a day, which we felt like was an appropriate amount of time per day that they were working. 80% were happy with the remote teachers, happy with them and their responsiveness. But 77% felt like they really needed more access to live instruction. And that ran all grade levels, and that they just needed more interaction, even though the remote teachers were trying. And 76% felt like their assignments, they just weren't getting feedback on them. They're handing them in to their kids at home, or to the teachers, their classroom teachers. And sometimes the remote teachers were trying to correct them, but it didn't have context for them. And so we've looked to resolve a few of those matters to make this better.
So what are we going to do? Make some changes here? What are we doing, Mr.
We do want to make changes. First, we're going to have Ms. Buteri. And I'm not going to read Ms. Buteri's resume. We know her.
Yeah, we discussed
yes,
that, but that's the first big change.
So we want to make some of these remote options better and sustainable, both for the kids and the district. Could we add 3 or 4 more remote teachers to help with it? Well, sure, we could. We'd have to pull them from somewhere in district, and that means more changes in district, and you're pulling them out of some other assignment. Or if you needed to replace those people, there aren't people to replace them with. There is a teacher shortage in the state of Massachusetts. Well, probably around the country, I imagine.
And this goes back to the term economy of scale.
Yep.
So in the economy of scale, if we had all of our 4th grade classes in one school, different story. Like we could pull from there because we could spread out the students among the other teachers for when we pull that teacher out. That is not the case. We have 2, 3, and 3. So if you pull a teacher out of the 3 classroom town, there's only two teachers now, and those numbers go beyond what they can sustain. So therein lies the economy of scale dilemma.
Right. So what we're proposing to do is where we have our greatest numbers at the K-3 level, and that's the level where the kids need the most support, sort of online absolutely. Direct instruction. So to end our instructional support for Florida Virtual at K-6, we only have about 10 students, 7 to 12, and for the majority of them, I believe it's working okay. Allow anyone who is happy with continuing to use FLDS to continue to do so, but knowing that it's not going to come with instructional support. And basically, we're going to provide the parents almost with a homeschool curriculum that they'd be able to do. In Ms. Puteri's role, she'd be able to provide sort of the background technology support, make sure they're moving along. If there's some things that need to be done behind the scenes, she can do so. But she wouldn't be teaching anyone anything. So that's about 28 students. We'd offer them to come back into the revised PRSD model. I think we want them to know what they're getting. K-3 have 1 teacher per grade level rather than split 2. And that remote support teacher would do a lot of the instruction for those kids. Those kids would still, at this point, stay connected to their home classroom. The classroom teachers, though, would be correcting the assignments and giving the feedback. It just makes more sense for them. They know the assignment. They know the expectations. They can certainly consult with the remote support teacher if need be. And the last bullet is the one, as we discussed earlier, that if we do end up doing the live streaming, that they can access it so that they can get some of that more of the instruction. They may not need it quite as much. They'll have a remote support teacher, especially K-3, where that person will be able to do a lot more of the instructional support. So this we propose to do. So, people really have asked, why not a remote academy like some other districts have done? And our struggle with that, again, was that economy of scale. We run eight second grade classrooms across the district, right? 3 at Bagnell, 3 in Merrimack, 2 at Page. When you started pulling kids out, and you said, well, you've got 25 kids, why don't you just run 7 classrooms and take one of those teachers? The problem was it was a few from here, a few from there, and we would have had to physically move kids from Bagnell over to go to a classroom at Page, and things like that would have had to make that work. It just never materialized. And we certainly, it would be challenging to do to them now, for
If
sure.
that was something you want us to explore, we would have you all tell us that
Yes.
that's what we want to do, because we know, we anticipate the towns would not be too fond of us doing that.
We need to have some flexibility too for students changing these models, but also students who are quarantined. Students who are quarantined need to have some access to some remote learning as well. And it just requires staffing that even if funding was there, it doesn't exist. And at the secondary level, it just is not possible to do. If you've got 5 kids who need chemistry, you have to have someone teach it separately, and that's not possible for us to do. So,
I counted it, we would need, based on what courses, we would need 17 licensure areas in order to cover the secondary needs.
Back in the summer, I remember July, the commissioner had said, well, maybe districts together and figure out how to do it, for high school kids and everything. And that would probably take almost a year to plan, to do.
But it's not been ignored.
Not a month.
How are we doing with physics? I read that that's probably the most difficult position to fill.
We're okay.
We're okay, okay.
Knock on wood.
So, so how's that gonna, what does that mean? How are things gonna change for the students and the teachers?
Yeah. So more focused time with the remote support teacher for students for sure. We talk about this live support instruction each day, virtual peers in the same grade level. And we're working on whether that streaming really works. At 7 to 12, we think it definitely looks different. Our teachers at K to 3, each of those remote teachers only have one grade level, so that really gives them a lot more ability to do what they need to do. More reasonable caseload, and they're not working with 16 classrooms, or they're narrowing that scope down. And it's more effective use of virtual time, and the kids are going to get more feedback on their assignments, and that's what they need really.
So we're gonna stop there and see if anybody has any questions about the remote update there. Let's see, Lisa's got her hand up.
With this new change going into effect, it starts on Monday, correct? With Mr. Buteri?
We haven't
Yes.
we haven't communicated out to the families yet about how and when and what exactly we're going to do.
But yes, for Ms. Buteri, you're correct. Ms. Buteri will start fully on the remote on Monday.
Okay, so essentially a timeline will kind of be created?
Yep, that's being worked on, yes.
Okay, so we are getting rid of the Florida virtual model for the lower elementary grades, but not the high school.
So no, so the Florida virtual will exist. It's just, so we know we have parents who are in there who are having a great experience. So they'll have that option to say, yeah, I want to stay in because
Oh, we're not supporting it.
yeah, right. I can support my child through this, and Ms. Buteri might be there as a contact to help them through, and that might be a fine option for them.
Okay. And the kids will have access to the live streaming if that takes place.
If we're able to work out what that looks like, they would. But at the K to 3 level, if it doesn't really work out into a lot of content, it doesn't concern us as much because they will have one teacher for one grade level.
And if we ever did have to go full remote, everybody would be able to transition, the staff would be able to transition over to that?
Yep.
Yeah, just like similar to what the high school had to do last Thursday and Friday.
Right.
Okay.
Which they did an exceptional job with.
And at what point in time will there be, I guess, a check on this to see how it's going, like in a month or 6 weeks or?
Yeah, I think if this goes on and there's a pilot, I think we're looking at giving it a good chunk of time so we can really get a feel for the people who are live streaming. What does that look like? Give opportunity for the remote teachers to tell us what that's looking like, and the teachers who are not doing the live but are pre-recording and posting, it gives them a time to work with amongst their peers to say, hey, this is way easier, you should do this, or you should go this way. Yes.
4 to 5 weeks brings us to Thanksgiving.
Okay.
Scary as that sounds.
Emily?
Okay.
Emily?
Are the people who are supporting the K to 3 groups, remote groups, elementary
K to
teachers?
3 folks, yes, they're all elementary teachers. Yep.
Thank you.
All right.
Chris?
I missed that.
Yeah. So mine is somewhat off topic, but still in topic. Well, it was something somebody brought up, I think, one of the public comments, and you brought up many times about, are we still missing personnel actually teaching classes in front of kids? In addition to that, if we have to have subs and we don't have a subgroup, it just kind of what's happening with any of that. I mean, I wouldn't want us to be in a situation where there's a content area or a grade that actually doesn't have somebody qualified to do what they should be doing.
Yep. So we are fully staffed from a teaching standpoint. We have a few paraprofessional positions that we're operating without at the moment. We're still looking to fill some of those. Certainly our substitute pool is very limited though. So in the event that we have teachers who are out, we may not have someone who's certified right away. We have some folks who qualified for waivers, which means they have the background and the knowledge to do it. They just hadn't met all the criteria for certification or licensure. So, but all of our teaching positions are filled with people who are licensed.
And
I guess, like, if it's a short-term sub position, that's okay. I'm assuming if we're in a long-term sub position, we're gonna try to get somebody
that's
proper qualifications.
that is.
I mean, I know it's really tough
Yeah,
right now.
there are a large number of long-term subs that we have in place, right? Large number of long-term subs.
And they are licensed.
Yeah. And that's how we know the pool is very thin as well.
Yes.
Murray, did you have a question?
I just wanted to clarify that last chart. So the changes that are being made, just for myself and people who maybe, the changes being made to the remote model that affect the hybrid model teachers, or that they will now be doing the grading and the assignments.
And many were already, because they just recognized it as just an easier thing to do in totality.
Yeah.
The original plan was to sort of split it a little bit, have the remote support teachers do some.
Right.
And in the end, most teachers realized, like, no, it's 2 kids, and I would have had them anyways.
Right.
I'll do it. It's my assignment. I get it.
And I think that's what we learned yesterday, that there
Yeah.
was some inconsistency.
So we just want to have that be
Not all schools were
consistent.
doing it that way.
That's
Not
right.
all teachers were
And
doing
we
it.
just want to have it be consistent, so the kids get the feedback they should
Right.
have. And if a classroom teacher is unsure, they can consult with the remote teacher. Some things may not be so easy to do without ever really working with the kid.
But that would be the only significant change you'd see from the changes in remote learning affecting hybrid
Correct.
learning.
Correct.
Is what
Yep.
I'm trying to affect. Thank you.
No.
Me?
And so then, I know it's impossible.
I can't see behind me.
With the remote students right now, are they currently being assessed in any way, like formal assessments with tests? And does that change with the new model?
Yeah, so they'd be taking the regular assessments. I think, some of the challenges are, for instance, like in a science class with a lab, and that they may not really be able to perform the lab. They missed out on a good hazmat day as we had last week, but, so they're taking the assessments as well. Yep.
And so that's not changing with.
No, it won't change. No.
All right, so we'll move on then to our next part. Let me share this so people can see it. But just that focus on learning. So this is kind of a big piece, right? The curriculum piece. And I know, we've talked a lot about the models that we're looking at. We started this conversation way back in June, July. And so we thought it was important to come back here and just reemphasize the reason why we're here is about curriculum. It's about the learning. And I am going to go down a little history here. So some of you, I know Dina and Marie, you heard this, right? You were there present when this was said. And this was said by an educator who said, when you got here, you remember, we didn't have a curriculum. And that's fact. That is fact for our district. So when Brent and I started almost 2.5 years ago, there was no standardized curriculum in our district. And that part in parentheses, and the state told us exactly that. You recall that report that was done early, and it came out in November, where they said, you don't have a curriculum. And that's true. And there was a curriculum. It was the Pentucket curriculum, and it was called, Chris, you remember this. Remember I asked, I remember. But the curriculum was, the teachers are professionals and should be empowered to create their curriculum. So they did. But there's consequences to doing that. So when we arrived, the teachers were allowed to make their own curriculum. It was inconsistent across the board. There's inconsistency all over the place, right? Some of the curriculum was never, so they had this curriculum and some of them didn't get through all of it. And not only that, but it wasn't aligned to the state standards, which is required. That's how we assess students. So when you're having conversations about where a score is going, why a score is, well, hey, it's because if you're going to be given a test and you aren't taught the curriculum that had to do with that assessment, that's a problem. You're not going to score, like the scores aren't going to be where they need to be. And then how students were being assessed depended on what school they were at or what tools were being used. And there was no centralized assessment being done because they weren't using the same curriculum. And I'm just this is just COVID, when we talk about curriculum, COVID is not a distraction. It is a reality, right? So I don't want to, well, you're using COVID as, no, we're not using COVID as, COVID is just what it is. It's here in front of us. We're having to deal with it. Does it force us to take our eye off the ball? Yes, it does. You have to deal with a pandemic. That's the reality of it. That doesn't mean we ignore the curriculum part. We are always working on the curriculum part. And all of you are a big part of that, right? You constantly have asked questions about what is it, like the questions you're asking tonight. You're asking probing questions about, are we doing what's best for students? How can we make sure the curriculum's aligned? And we're coming to you saying, these are the problems we're seeing. Here's how we're looking to make those adjustments so that we can ensure that the students have the best learning opportunities as possible. And that is not something that's done Justin Bartholomew or Brent Conway or Justin and Brent combined in a bubble. Like, that's done collaboratively. Mr. Conway in particular goes around and works with groups of people on all of the curriculum issues all the time. And when he comes back and reports to you these chunks, it's because he wants to let you know what's going on and you have that opportunity to give the feedback. And I want you to know that we have very much appreciated both the feedback and the support. And we very much appreciate that you recognize that the curriculum that we were putting in was necessary and critically important in moving us forward as a district. So I just wanted to get out there because I just don't think everyone fully understands that curriculum is on the forefront of all the work that we end up doing. And then we just take a look at the time frame on this. So it seems like we've been around for a long time, right? So the first year, we show up in July of, I guess that's 2018. We're here July 2018. And immediately we implement a K-8 math curriculum. That was immediate. And I think if you talk to Mr. Conway or I, and I think we all have, it was something that we noticed long before we even showed up in the district, that this was just, there was no curriculum in place. And that is a red flag for anyone. It doesn't matter if you're a teacher, administrator, it's a red flag. And we also put in a structure for the K-6 literacy, the timing of when to do some reading things and literacy skills. And obviously, I think you all heard from people about the stress and frustration that caused. And I will say, yes, it did. And was it necessary? Yes, it was. I mean, it's unfortunate it had to happen. And again, I will forever say, this is not a condemnation of the educators. This is what they were instructed to do. They had been doing what they were told to do. So they were doing what they were supposed to. And then the second year, which was last year, so we continued to develop all that curriculum. We evaluated the history curriculum. We adopted a new history curriculum. We're developing a writing curriculum. And then COVID comes in. So we don't have 2 full years under our belts of going ahead and instilling curriculum. And then you run into the first 4 months of this year. And all we're doing is the pandemic hybrid. Like, that's what we're working. We're working in a pandemic, in a hybrid. And yes, all sorts of challenges. But the last hour and a half, you've heard us talking just about the curriculum, how it's being delivered, how we're looking to make changes, and taking your comments and your questions to help us think further about that. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to figure out, because there is no precedent for this. So what is the best way to deliver, knowing that there's so many restrictions in place, and knowing that tomorrow might be a completely different shift that we have to make. So Mr. Conway, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. So you hear me talk a lot about early literacy, and these really are the foundational skills for all learning at any grade level. And in 1920, last year, we implemented the Heggerty Phonemic Awareness Curriculum at pre-K to grade 2. We trained our teachers. They put this into place. It's a Tier 1 phonemic awareness curriculum, and this is at the baseline of foundational literacy. We continued a tiered approach to literacy, regular data meetings, and we really started to use predictive screening assessments. And these are assessments that predict reading proficiency rather than assessment. And these are criterion reference, not norm reference. They're not diagnostic, but they're screening. And they tell us if a child is not at a certain level, they're at risk for not meeting that level at the end of the year. You need to do something about it. They inform what we need to do. So DIBELS is one, diagnostic, even they use the word diagnostic, inventory of basic early literacy skills. And we train teachers across K to 6 this year on the newest version of that. And we started to develop a literacy plan. We hope to finish that pre-K to 6 for reading and writing. And we've really advanced our practices with structured literacy model, and that's consistent with the science of reading. And that has led us to earning, and I've talked about it already to you, our early literacy grant. So we can go to go to that one. That's fine. Okay, all right. So as we implemented Heggerty, just to tell you the impact that curriculum has on student learning. So what you're looking there is, these are kindergarten scores. And the orange represents the 18-19 school year. That was before we implemented the Heggerty Phonemic Awareness Curriculum. And then the green represents last year, okay? So in the fall last year on what's called the FSF, First Sound Fluency, a phonemic awareness skill, believe it or not, kids in both years in kindergarten started the year, 58% of them were where they're supposed to be, right? And I know people get alarmed, oh my God, why is it? That number's fine, those numbers go up all the time. So you can see even for when we didn't use that curriculum, that went from 58 to 84% of the kids by the middle of the year. But when we actually use that curriculum, it actually goes to 91%. And then the same for the phonemic segmentation, you see that goes up to 92, and the same for the nonsense word fluency. Big increases for our kindergarten when we use a curriculum that we know is based in this case, the science of reading. It's not just kindergarten, it's also first grade. So we can go to the next slide, and you'll see the impact was had in first grade. So again, in the fall, the kids 2 years ago were at 68% on that nonsense word fluency. And then the year we actually used the curriculum, they were at 62. When we use it, they went from 62 to 79% in the middle of the year.
So again, when you're looking at this, it's important to understand, when you're looking at 68, 62, you're like, man, that's a drop off of 6. Different group of kids. The baseline is going to be different. They're not the same children. So yeah, Mr. Conway's point, when you don't implement the curriculum, yeah, it's great you started out at 68, but you only went up 6%. Right. When you implement the curriculum, it goes from 62, goes up 17%.
And this is in the middle of the year. We didn't even use the assessment in the springtime.
We didn't have that. Right.
So this is in the middle of the year. And I want to let you know that this data right here, these last 2 slides, is actually going to be highlighted in Massachusetts Dyslexia Association's monthly newsletter at the end of this month, because it really shows that when you provide Tier 1 instruction and curriculum that is designed to intervene and provide that baseline, that it makes a huge difference for kids. So we have some other visuals too.
And again, this is, so when we're talking about this is the teachers who had to go through, do this work. They had to do the training. They had to understand what was expected. And that is stress, that's anxiety, that's all those pieces because it's outside of what they were normally doing. So they were the ones who were doing this work. And it pays off. It pays big.
Our kindergarten teachers are so proud of themselves.
Yeah.
They should be. They did really good work.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this year we were admitted to the early literacy grant, and that was just announced. We have teams from all 3 elementary schools. The grant allowed us to purchase an updated screener, DIBELS 8. Our administrative team actually had great PD last Friday with Dr. Kilpatrick, who is world-renowned. Coaching support for all 3 schools, but it's being done virtually. And we implemented a tiered assessment outline which is based on the simple view of reading. And that is shared with folks as well. This is sort of the cover page, and it gives you an overview. The simple view of reading talks about reading comprehension being an outcome, and that there's two major components that go into it. So the decoding and those real foundational skills, and then your language comprehension, which is your background knowledge, vocabulary. And the thing to know about this is a multiplication problem. As both of those get stronger, the outcome of comprehension gets bigger. And if decoding is 0, and you can have all the vocabulary you want and background knowledge you want, if you can't read the words, you all know multiplication, something multiplied by 0 equals 0. So your comprehension will be 0. And then vice versa, we can teach you to decode and you can be fluent. If you don't have vocabulary and background knowledge, you won't be able to comprehend anything you're decoding. So this is everything that we're doing from a literacy perspective is based on that visual. So then we implement a whole screening tiered assessment from K to 8 that has us assessing these particular skills, because developmentally, this is everything we know leads to outcomes. And there's a lot more to that. That's just sort of the visual to show you. So moving ahead, we're positioned really to purchase and implement a core literacy program for K to 6 for next year that's based on the science of reading and knowledge building structure. We use Foundations and Integrity. Those are foundational skill programs, K to 3, K to 2. We'll continue to use those. And then we need to find something that really works for us. We're piloting a few. Wisdom is one that we're piloting. It works very well in this setup. And we're hoping we're going to purchase some more decodables. The grant allowed us to do that. So a lot of good things here. The grant is helping us move along with. And then from a curriculum perspective, you know these are the texts that we've added for social studies with 3rd grade, 6th grade texts. This is one of a 2-year program. We're going to 7th after that.
And again, remember, this was the curriculum that was reviewed, and we adopted new curriculum because this curriculum gives the perspectives of the people that were here first and that arrived here afterwards in all different scenarios, rather than the traditional perspectives of the way that we were taught.
So we talk about high school and middle school curriculum. Middle school is using literacy and math data meetings. We started last year and then that was interrupted. We actually have our middle school data meetings this week. Middle school is focusing on school-wide approach to vocabulary instruction. That's driven by the screening assessments. We know we need to have that in place. Added the use of InSync online platform for Eureka Math, and we're fully implementing the Pearson and Vision Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2 programs, both at the middle school and high school. Additional added curriculum materials, that's 7th grade world history, and we added a new AP bio text, which was desperately needed. The other one did not cover it.
It was there when I was here, I think.
Yeah, so, and we talk about these curriculum materials, and I think what Dr. B talked about too is, when a district has curriculum, you can sort of have 2 approaches to it. If you don't want to purchase a program, then you need to have support people in place, whether they're coaches, instructional support people, literacy specialists, you have to have all those people in place that can help your teachers continue to develop and monitor and implement that curriculum. If you don't have those people, then you need to have something that gives that outline, that gives that anchor. You got to have one or the other. And Pentucket really hadn't necessarily done that.
So not only had Pentucket not done that, there was no assistant superintendent to help oversee anything. So not only do you not have the curriculum instruction people or instructional support folks in the school buildings, there's no one at central office administratively to help oversee that.
So we're trying to financially plan out where every year we have additional purchases to get us back up to speed. And build in that direction.
And always that build is, let's get this in place. And if we disappear at some point, it can keep on going.
Right.
This district has been left in good shape and it can keep on doing the work it needs to do.
And that's the algebra program with geometry and algebra 2. And our next step is really preparing for combined school. Funny enough, I was out front in the middle school dismissal today with Mr. Carlson, and Mr. Conant, and we were saying, we think we're probably standing about the 20-yard line right out there. And it's, this moving into that new building is what, 18 months away, 19 months away?
Yeah, it'll be-
I mean, it's coming quick. So really the second part of this year, our next sort of project to tackle is addressing middle school, high school programming graduation review, like the whole program with everyone under one roof, to making sure that we're going to get some feedback from parents and community, and really reviewing the level system, the placement, how we can maximize the new space along with dual enrollment with Northern Essex. So a post-COVID world in a new fancy building, but making sure that our education and curriculum and programming aligns with that. We're not going to tackle that this month, but we're going to probably begin that in earnest in January and begin that process of really designing what that will look like.
That wraps up our curriculum. All right, so we'll go ahead and see if anybody has questions.
Can you go back to that last slide, please? So, I have a question.
Chris?
So I guess part of the question becomes, it's great that we're planning ahead, but are we looking at the impact on the kids who are actually in high school right now? And some of the things that we may be wanting to change for the future, do we need to look sooner than that to make changes? And I'll give one as an example. There's a requirement at the high school for technology. It's like, okay, right now, everybody should get some pass on that because they're all somehow learning with technology and figuring out how to all do this. So I'm wondering if there's some things that should be more imminent. I think some might be mandated by the state, because even if you think about health and wellness and the gym class, I mean, there's things that just we can't do to the extent that the state can require it, but it still is a state requirement.
So I'm sure you have more questions, but I think you're right. And much like we didn't finish our literacy plan, but we knew right away we needed to update our literacy screener to the new DIBELS 8.
Yep.
So we didn't wait to finish the plan. We did that right away.
Right.
And I think that could be something that basically comes out of the early discussions. If there are some things right away we can make changes on, there's no reason to wait until you have a new building for things that don't necessarily mean a new building is needed.
Right.
Yep.
I think there was something else on there.
Sorry.
He keeps taking it away. And I guess the last piece with regard to the parental and community input, like I really hope that that's something that is really trying to get as much input as possible. I think one of the things that, as we were hearing a lot about the HMN retiring it, I mean, there was a lot of information that alumni came forward with and really could reflect on, we never learned about this. We were never exposed to this. This wasn't something that we talked about across the curriculum, not just in history class. So I really hope that, we can take a look and talk to some of those recent 10-year grads and say, what are things that you're now realizing we should have done differently or we could be doing differently? Because I really think that that's very valuable, because I think if you go here, or if you go to Triton, or everybody has different experiences, not necessarily we're the right way to do it, but there's good things we can bring so that the students here can achieve more than perhaps they are right now.
So there's a phrase, and it's actually a process that some schools have done, school districts have done, in saying, develop a portrait of a graduate for your community. And there are some protocols we can do around that. I don't know if we'd engage quite in the process that some others have around it, because it's taken some people do it K-12, and I think the COVID actually would prevent us from doing a lot of it. But I think how do you run focus groups basically in the middle of COVID? You just, what's the best approach to doing that and gathering that information? And maybe it is a little bit, what do we want our graduate to look like when they leave? And then work backwards, at least down to grade 7, and think about how does that work from 7 to 12? So how do we get there?
Some schools on a semi-regular basis bring in graduates and almost set up like a seminar for particularly seniors and maybe even juniors. And then sometimes, they'll make presentations, they'll talk about, what was the best experience you had? So I kind of piggyback the same concern that you just raised.
Yeah.
I think that'd be a fabulous idea.
So I think, we as Pentucket have not done NEASC accreditation in many years. And I don't know that it's necessary to do. There's a lot that NEASC would ask you to do that is really not helpful necessarily. But I think there are elements of that that would play a role in this process. So, yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, Joanna?
Yeah, so, I just had two questions on books that we're purchasing. First, we mentioned that we're purchasing an AP Bio book, so are we moving towards purchasing AP Bio?
We bought it, so, the
Okay,
AP
using it
Bio.
this year.
Yeah, they're using it right now. Yep.
Okay, and then as far as other texts that we're purchasing, how long is a textbook typically good for? And what's our plan for replacement?
Yep. So we don't have a textbook replacement plan as a district. I think we're playing catch up at the moment. I think really the priority at this point is to make sure we get literacy curriculum, which can have an expense to it for sure. That could consume a district's whole textbook replacement plan in 1 year. And then I think once we're at that point, I think developing a replacement plan is a priority. We have some unmet needs from our social studies review. We know we still have U.S. history texts that we could potentially look at in the near future as well. And we have, we had talked about this really being a science curriculum review year. I think we have a lot on our plate, and to do that effectively may not be the best approach, and that might get kicked out a year to do that. And then develop a textbook replacement plan. These textbooks, this is interesting, we've talked about this before a little bit, they're e-licenses is what you're buying. They'll give the books away if you're buying the e-licenses. The e-licenses are generally, if you buy them for 5 years, you maximize your price on that. The text remains, but basically things are like the e-licenses are 5 years. So typical text replacement or curriculum review cycle tends to be 5 years as well. So at some point after we get settled, I think we should think about what is an annual budget line item for curriculum renewal resources, right? Not necessarily text, but curriculum renewal resources. In prior years, it's probably been 30 to 40,000. It should probably maybe be 140 to 200 per year, at least for a little while, and then sometimes you can stagger that a little. Just something to consider about what that looks like. So, and that can go up and down a little, but to have a much higher ceiling to start with.
Anyone out there have any more questions? No? Okay, I just want to thank Brent and Dr. B for putting this slideshow together, because I know it took you a lot of time and it was a lot of information, and I appreciate you going through it all with us. Now on to policies. We have just a couple of them, and could I get a motion to approve JRE student parking permit and campus traffic policy?
Move JRE student parking permit.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Chris?
So fourth line down, where it says campuses with an apostrophe, it should be a plural. Possessive. That makes sense. Which I looked up, I don't double the S. That's up.
That's it? So we will vote on approving the policy with the grammatical change.
Correction.
Yes. Roll call vote, Wayne? Okay. Joanna?
Yes.
Lisa? Emily?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Marie?
Yes.
Bill? Yes. And Dina, yes. Thank you. Now we go to JRE-R, student parking permit and campus traffic regulations and procedures. Do I have a motion to approve?
Move JRE-R.
Any discussion?
Second?
Joanna?
I just have a question about number 2 when we see grades. Is that true? In the older grade students, we have an older sophomore. Do we have a parking permit for them? And if we do, I just want to make sure our policy is consistent with our practice.
I would ask what we do if space is allowed.
Yeah, I mean, so if there was space allowed for students with standing, we would restrict it. Just, I don't think it hasn't happened. Well,
Okay. Yeah, it's just that number 2 said parking permit is maybe granted only to juniors and seniors. So should it just be only to students with good standing and seniors as a priority?
That's, what do you think, Maureen? Dick, Lisa, you guys are on the policy committee?
I'm good with that.
Okay.
So can you also add then, just with seniors, having the first priority followed by
Juniors.
juniors?
Are there any other questions?
Yeah.
Chris?
So I think parking and traffic regulations came from the actual contract, which I think makes sense in some regards, but like number 7, I think it should just read students consent and agree rather than like what's there with the blank there from the contract. So if you said students consent and agree to authorize the school, blah, blah, blah. And then I think it's also under item 8 and item 9. Instead of saying this agreement and this contract, to the agreement. Because our policy is not what someone's gonna sign, they're gonna sign the form, the contract. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yep. So Chris, you said 8 and what?
So item 8.
Oh, the contract, got it.
Yeah, the
I
permit,
see it.
parking and traffic agreement and sufficient cost to avoid the contract. So that you're referring to the contract, not.
Are there any other questions or comments?
I have another question back here. Is the Kentucky Regional High School parking permit application part of what we're discussing right
No, application.
now? Following on what we're discussing?
No, so we actually do the application, we just put in there, like, this is what the application
Yeah, so
would have, like, because we need the language to be the same, like, the language in the application can't contradict the language in the policy. So that's why that was added.
Yeah, so regarding our application, do we feel prohibit two people saying we from having self-report?
I mean, that's how it was written up.
It says the only one permit per household if there is more than one student driver in a family. Is that actually our practice?
I've had a few students come in to get parking passes that are twins, and they just want one.
Okay.
So no one's asked me. I don't think we would say no.
I mean, again, if there's space.
And we have a lot of space available right now.
Yeah, so I can just imagine families, you know, with the junior and senior on some schedule for sports might want two different parking permits. So.
Yeah, no, it hasn't happened yet. Well,
Okay.
and we still have spaces.
Yeah,
That is the contract.
I can put dependent on availability. Others can be considered.
yeah.
So just to be clear though, these pieces would be more something that Mr. Seymour would deal with. So we can take notes on this and share with him so he can make the adjustments.
Anyone have any other questions? So So we're voting to approve with changing a little bit of the wording to include students instead of juniors and seniors. In good standing with seniors having the first priority followed by juniors. We're also, number 7, taking out the blank and putting students' consent. And number 8, the permit, parking, and number 9, the contract. Roll call vote, Wayne? Joanna?
Yes.
Lisa?
Yes.
Emily? Dick?
Yeah.
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Marie?
Yes.
Bill? And Guna, yes. So that covers our new business. I also wanted to mention that our next meeting will be on November 17th due to the presidential debate. That'll be,
The elections.
oh, sorry, presidential election. That will be on November 3rd. We will not be holding a school committee that evening. So just wanted to let you all know that. And now I need a motion to go into executive session to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation. If an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body and the chair so declares.
Move executive session.
Second.
Roll call vote. Wayne? Joanna?
Yes.
Lisa?
Yes.
Emily?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Marie?
Yeah.
Bill? Okay. And Dina, yes. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
So you-